My name is Ryan Mercer. I'm 35 years old, and I serve as a communications officer in the United States Army. I just came home after 13 months deployed in Afghanistan. I still remember how my boots hit the tarmac back on American soil. There was that brief moment of relief, the kind you don't even notice until it loosens the muscles in your back. All I could think about on that plane ride home was seeing my son again, feeling his little arms wrap around my neck, and maybe, just maybe, sharing a quiet evening with Madeline, my wife. We hadn't spoken much while I was away. I chalked it up to the time zone, to stress, to life being hard. I didn't let myself go down the rabbit hole of doubt. I was finally coming home, and that was supposed to fix everything. I had planned to surprise them. I'd even picked up a stuffed polar bear for Luca, one of those last-minute airport buys that seemed silly but felt right. I stood outside our apartment complex for a second, just listening. It was late afternoon. Sunlight was low, warm against my skin, and the air smelled of dry leaves. I expected laughter or the thud of little feet running to the door. I knocked, then knocked again. The door wasn't locked. I stepped inside. The lights were off. I didn't hear the TV, or the sound of toys clattering, or even the low hum of a dishwasher. Just silence. Cold, thick silence that hung in the air like fog. I called out their names. Nothing. I flipped the light switch. It flickered once and settled into a dim yellow buzz. That's when I saw it. The apartment was nearly empty. The couch was gone. The coffee table, all of Luca's toys. The framed photo of the three of us from his 3rd birthday, the one where he smeared cake on my nose, was missing from the wall. In the corner of the living room sat a cardboard box. It looked almost apologetic, like someone had left behind a half-hearted explanation. I opened it. Inside were 3 things. Luca's old teddy bear with one eye missing, a pair of his socks still rolled together, and a final notice from the electric company. On top of that was a manila envelope. I didn't want to open it. I knew whatever was inside would take this from confusing to real. But I did. Inside were unpaid bills. Lots of them. Credit cards, rent statements, and something about a car loan I didn't recognize. Most were in my name. Some were overdue by months. My hands started shaking. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by silence and paper. There was no note, no message, just absence. That was the moment it hit me. Not with sound or fury, but with a slow, sinking feeling like a ship dipping beneath the surface. They were gone. My wife and my son had left while I was serving. I didn't know when, I didn't know why, and I didn't even know where. I don't think I breathed for the next 10 minutes. I just sat there, still in uniform, still clutching the polar bear like it might have answers. Every room I walked into confirmed the same thing. They'd taken everything that mattered, except me. I don't remember leaving the apartment. I don't remember the elevator ride down. But I remember sitting in my truck for hours, engine off, door half open, watching the evening fold into night. Watching normal people come home, wondering when mine had disappeared. And that's where it began. Not with a fight or a goodbye, but with a missing couch, a box of toys, and a silence so loud I can still hear it now. I tried calling Madeline the moment I left the apartment. Straight to voicemail. I tried again, then again, telling myself maybe her phone had died or she was with Luca and didn't hear it. But as hours passed and there was no return call, no text, no sign of life, the silence grew heavier. The next morning, I walked over to the leasing office, hoping to find answers. The woman at the front desk raised her eyebrows when I gave my name. She said our unit had been officially vacated almost 2 months ago. I stood there, still in uniform, trying to understand how my name could be on a lease that had been canceled while I was in Afghanistan. She said someone came in, signed papers, turned in the keys, and that was that. Confused, I checked with the postal service. A forwarding address had been filed Barcelona, Spain. That made no sense. Madeline didn't have family there. She'd never mentioned wanting to live abroad. I began calling every mutual friend we had, every number I could remember. Most of them hadn't heard from her in months. A few offered awkward condolences. like they knew something I didn't and didn't want to be the one to say it. Back at the apartment, I sat down with the pile of unopened mail. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. Bank statements from accounts I didn't remember opening, charges at stores I'd never visited. A car loan for a used SUV registered in my name, though I hadn't purchased anything since before deployment. The signatures looked like mine, but there was something off, too neat, too careful. I pulled up my credit report. There were 4 new credit lines opened in the past year, all under my social security number, all with addresses I didn't recognize. I began to feel like a ghost inside my own life, like someone had taken my name and started living without me. I drove to the address listed on one of the car registrations. It led to a storage unit on the edge of town. The manager said the rental had been cleared out last week. Name on the paperwork, mine. The ID provided, a military ID card. I checked my wallet. Mine was still there. That's when it sank in. This wasn't just a sudden move or a family emergency. This was calculated. Whatever was happening wasn't an accident. Someone had been planning this for months. And I was the last one to find out. I went to Luca's old preschool the next day. It felt surreal walking into that place, remembering the mornings we used to drop him off together, his tiny hand clinging to mine, his backpack always half unzipped. I asked the receptionist if they had any forwarding information, hoping maybe there had been a transfer within the city. She hesitated, then pulled up the file. It said Luca's records had been formally transferred to an international school in Barcelona. I stood there, just staring at the screen. Barcelona? That couldn't be right. Madeline hated the idea of moving overseas. She once said Europe felt like a museum, beautiful, but not where she'd want to live. She didn't speak Spanish. She didn't even like flying. None of it made sense. Why would she take our son halfway across the world without telling me? I left the school feeling like the world had tilted slightly sideways. My thoughts were racing. I kept thinking there had to be a reasonable explanation, something I was missing. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe she had family I never met. But every door I opened only led to more confusion. When I got home, I logged into my online banking for the first time since deployment. I had avoided it while I was away. Madeline handled our bills, and I figured it was one less thing to stress over while I was overseas. But now, looking at the statements, I saw charges I couldn't explain. Flights booked under my account, rent payments to an address in Miami, large withdrawals at random ATMs. Several payments are marked as wire transfers. The amounts were not small. I checked the security log. The account had been accessed dozens of times from IP addresses in places I'd never been, not just 1 or 2 accidental logins. A pattern, a routine. Like someone had been managing it, pretending to be me. That sinking feeling from the apartment returned, but deeper this time. I wasn't just being shut out, I was being replaced. My identity, my money, my connection to my son, they were being rerouted, repackaged, erased. I wanted to believe there was a mistake, but the more I looked, the more I saw a pattern. This wasn't chaos, it was a plan. Every action, every account, every false trail had purpose. Madeline hadn't just left me, she had taken pieces of me with her, and she'd started long before I even boarded that plane. I drove to the VA office the next day, asking for help checking my Social Security activity. The woman at the counter was polite but looked uncomfortable when she pulled up the file. There were multiple credit applications listed over the past year, all opened with my number, all linked to addresses in Florida. I hadn't lived in Florida a day in my life. I asked her to print everything. There were 4 credit cards, a utilities account, and a rental agreement for a condo in Miami. The strangest part was the signatures. They looked like mine. Identical loops, same pressure, even the slight tilt I have when I sign in a rush. But I had never touched those documents. At this point, I knew I needed help. Not from a lawyer, not yet. I needed someone who could dig deeper, past the surface. I called Mark, a guy I'd served with back in Kandahar. He had a knack for systems, ran point on all our encrypted comms, and after the Army started his own private IT consultancy. We hadn't talked in a while, But when I told him what was happening, he didn't even hesitate. He invited me over that night. I brought every piece of paper I had, every printout, every statement, every login history. Mark sat in front of 3 monitors, typing like his fingers had minds of their own. He barely spoke, just grunted occasionally and narrowed his eyes. After 2 hours of silence, he leaned back and said he'd found something strange. Someone had been accessing my online accounts using a VPN that bounced between cities. The pattern was too clean for a regular user. It looked like someone knew exactly how to avoid detection. Mark dug deeper and found a shadow email linked to my bank recovery account. It wasn't mine. It had never been mine. But it was listed as the secondary recovery for all my digital logins. The email address was a blend of numbers and letters, like a burner. But when Mark cracked the metadata on a few of the backup entries, something jumped out. The email had been registered under a fake name, but the phone number used to set it up had once belonged to Madeline. She had used it back when we were first dating. I had memorized those digits once. I hadn't seen that number in years. I sat there, trying to absorb it. This wasn't just fraud. This was deliberate, sustained identity theft. She hadn't just left me. She had erased me, repainted my name across accounts and leases and purchases like it was hers to use. While I was ducking mortar fire overseas, she had been logging into my life from a laptop. Mark looked at me and asked if I was okay. I couldn't answer. I was frozen, not in fear but in clarity. This hadn't started when I got home. It hadn't even started while I was deployed. It had been brewing long before I ever left, and I'd been too trusting to see it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark with Mark's report open on the table, pages of login data and email headers staring back at me. Every line was a betrayal. Every timestamp was proof that someone had worn my skin while I was thousands of miles away. And now I couldn't shake the feeling that my real war had just begun. 3 days after Mark uncovered the shadow email, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. His name was Taylor, a supply sergeant from my first tour. He had retired early and worked in private logistics now. The message was simple. He asked if we could meet in person. Said he had something that belonged to me. We met in a diner just outside Fayetteville. He slid a small black USB drive across the table, like he was handing over state secrets. He said it had come through a mutual contact, still active in a European base, someone who noticed my name in a flagged report. I didn't ask too many questions. I just took it home, plugged it into Mark's laptop, and braced myself. The files were clean but heavy. Dozens of scanned documents, fake contracts, signatures that looked like mine but weren't. There were spreadsheets mapping financial transactions that bounced from American banks to shell companies in Spain, Germany, and finally Belize. My name was all over them. So was my military ID. Someone had been using my deployment status to justify transfers, saying I'd authorized them while overseas. Except I never had. The folder labeled audio was the worst. There were 3 recordings. In the first, I heard Madeline's voice. Calm, clear, cold. She was talking to someone I didn't recognize, laying out a timeline. She said I'd be unreachable for months. That was the perfect window to shift assets and consolidate accounts. She mentioned the condo in Miami, said it needed to be in my name, so no flags would be raised. Then she laughed. Not a light laugh. The kind that lets you know she didn't feel an ounce of guilt. In the second recording, she talked about the military pension and how to reroute it. Said once it was all done, she and Luca would disappear. Somewhere warm, somewhere I'd never look. She even joked about erasing the trail using my own security questions, which, of course, she knew by heart. The third one broke me. She said the words out loud. That I'd served my country long enough, and now it was her turn. That she didn't want to be a soldier's wife anymore. That she'd waited years for a way out, and this was it. I sat there in front of the screen, breath gone. My fists were clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. Everything I'd built, my identity, my reputation, my home was being used like a disguise. And she was the one holding the mask. But somewhere in that pain, a line formed. sharp, clean. I realized this wasn't about love or even betrayal anymore. This was war. A different kind, but war just the same. I had evidence now, not suspicions, not paranoia, but hard proof. I knew what she had done, and I knew what I had to do. I closed the laptop, called a lawyer, and started writing everything down. Every date, every name, every lie. Because if she wanted to erase me, I was going to make damn sure the world remembered who I was. I brought everything to the FBI field office in Raleigh. Not just the USB, but a full timeline. Every document Mark and I had pieced together, and the audio files, they took it seriously. A special agent pulled me aside after reviewing the material. He said I had a solid case for identity theft and international fraud. But he also warned me that going public with it could trigger scrutiny I might not be prepared for. He wasn't talking about the evidence. He was talking about me. A recently deployed soldier, divorced, missing his kid. They'd seen cases where stress from war blurred into obsession. If this went to court, and Madeline claimed I was unstable, it wouldn't be hard for a judge to believe her. That scared me more than anything. Not because it was true, but because the narrative was easy. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Then I left the building with my folder and made a decision. I wasn't going to rush this. I couldn't afford mistakes. So instead of going loud, I went quiet. I kept logging every detail. I printed every suspicious charge, screen captured every login, and marked every inconsistency with a highlighter. I built my case the way I'd learned to build recon reports in the field: methodical, patient, complete. I also reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. His name was Joseph Rains, a retired military attorney who had once helped a friend of mine fight a custody battle after returning from Iraq. He was blunt and didn't sugarcoat things. He said my odds weren't good, especially with Madeline already overseas and likely presenting herself as a stable parent. But he agreed to help, not because he thought it was easy, but because, as he put it, no one else was going to fight for me if I didn't. We met weekly, sometimes in person, sometimes over secure video calls. He guided me on what to document, what not to say, and what emotions to suppress in front of people who'd be judging my fitness as a father. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about clearing my name. It was about Luca. About making sure he knew I never left, that I had been fighting for him the entire time, just in a different kind of war. The courtroom was cold, quiet, and humming with tension. I sat across from Madeline for the first time in over a year. She looked polished, confident, untouched by everything she had left behind. Beside her sat a lawyer with a European accent, an expensive suit, and a briefcase filled with arguments I already knew were rehearsed. When it was my turn, I stood up slowly and handed over the flash drive. The judge asked if I had supporting evidence. I said yes. I had itemized bank statements, login histories, recorded audio, and affidavits. I laid them out one by one. My lawyer spoke, but I didn't hear most of it. My eyes never left Madeline. The judge leaned forward when the audio played. The part where she talked about rerouting my pension made the room go still. Her voice echoed through the chamber, calm and strategic. There was a visible shift in the energy. Her lawyer shifted in his seat. She stopped making eye contact. The final moment came when I was asked to address the court directly. I stood up again, slow, steady. I said I had served 13 months in Afghanistan, that I had watched friends bleed and carried their names home in silence, that I had written letters to my son every week, hoping he'd know his father never stopped thinking of him, and then I ended it. I may have served abroad, but I never left my son. You did. The judge didn't respond right away, just stared at both of us like weighing more than legal arguments. 10 minutes later, he gave the ruling. I was granted full custody. Madeline's parental rights were suspended pending an investigation into financial fraud, international identity theft, and custodial interference. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just let out the breath I'd been holding for over a year. The kind that sits in your chest and grows heavier with every lie, every night alone, every doubt about who you are. That breath left my body in that courtroom. As the bailiff escorted her out, She looked back once, no words. Just the same silence she left behind in our apartment. But this time, I didn't feel empty. I felt like a father again, a man with a name that still meant something. And I walked out of that courtroom not just with custody, but with something I hadn't felt in a long time: justice. War teaches you how to survive, how to read a threat before it hits, how to keep your head low when everything around you explodes. But nothing in all my deployments ever prepared me for betrayal from someone I trusted with my life. Combat was chaos, but betrayal was quiet. It snuck in, slowly. It wore the face of someone I loved. And when it hit, it didn't leave bruises. It left questions about who I was, what I missed, and whether I could ever trust my own judgment again. But through all of that, one thing never changed. My love for my son. That was the one war I was never willing to lose. I didn't fight back out of pride or revenge. I fought because no one else was going to protect what he meant to me. Not the courts, not the system, just me. We live in Montana now, a small place tucked between trees and mountains. There's a quiet here I never knew I needed. Luca runs through the yard every morning with his shoes half-tied and hair flying in the wind. He laughs loudly. He sleeps peacefully. And sometimes he reaches for my hand without saying a word. That's how I know we're healing. I'm telling this story not to reopen wounds, not to blame, but to remind anyone listening that silence is dangerous. If you don't speak up, if you don't push back, someone else will rewrite your story, piece by piece, until one day you don't recognize the life you're living, and by then it might be too late. I learned that the deepest war doesn't always happen in foreign countries. Sometimes it's right at home, in courtrooms, in bank statements, in the way people lie and smile in the same breath. But I also learned something else. They can steal your name, your money, even your reputation, but they cannot steal your purpose. They cannot take away the love you carry. And no matter how dark it gets, you can choose to reclaim the story they tried to erase. This is mine. I'm still standing, still fighting. And if my voice reaches just one person who needs to hear it, then everything I lost wasn't for nothing.